For 7 years, the house had never heard laughter. Not real laughter, not the kind that fills walls and lingers in corners. The mansion stood on a hill overlooking the city, all glass and stone and perfect symmetry. From the outside, it looked like success itself. People driving past slowed their cars just to stare. Some whispered the name of its owner like it was a legend. Adrian Cole, billionaire, investor, genius, a man who built empires out of nothing. But inside that mansion lived a silence so heavy it felt alive. No music played there, no television buzzed in the background, no guests stayed longer than necessary. Because the silence wasn't peaceful, it was painful. Adrian Cole sat alone most nights in his private study, staring at the same photograph on his desk. He didn't need to pick it up anymore. He knew every detail by heart. His wife, Elena, smiling softly, and between them a small boy with dark eyes and chubby cheeks. Lucas. The boy in the photograph was 3 years old. The boy upstairs, asleep in his room, was 10, and he had never heard a sound in his life. Lucas was born deaf, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Elena died the night Lucas was born. Complications, the doctors had said, words spoken gently, professionally, like they were talking about a broken machine, not a human life. Adrian remembered holding her hand, feeling it grow colder as machines beeped around them. Her lips moved, trying to say something. He leaned close, desperate to hear her final words. But no sound came, just like their son. From that night on, silence became Adrian Cole's punishment. He blamed himself for everything. If he had chosen a different hospital, if he had pushed the doctors harder, if he hadn't been so focused on deals and numbers and growth, maybe Elena would still be alive. Maybe Lucas would be able to hear her voice. That guilt followed Adrian everywhere. So he did what billionaires do when faced with a problem. He tried to buy a solution. Over the next 7 years, Adrian spent millions, no, tens of millions, trying to save his son. Private specialists in New York, research hospitals in Germany, experimental clinics in Japan. Doctors flew in on private jets just to examine Lucas. They ran scans, they ran tests, they used words Adrian barely understood. Congenital deafness, irreversible, no surgical solution. Every single one ended the same way. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cole, there's nothing we can do." Nothing we can do. Adrian hated those words. He would nod politely, shake their hands, write checks that could fund entire schools, and then walk out feeling emptier than before. Lucas, meanwhile, grew up in a world without sound. He learned sign language, he learned to read lips, but there was something about him that unsettled Adrian. The boy was quiet, even for a deaf child. Lucas didn't throw tantrums, didn't demand attention, didn't cry loudly like other kids. He just watched, from windows, from corners of rooms, from behind his father's legs at social events. And sometimes, often, Lucas would touch his left ear, just for a second, like it hurt, like something bothered him. Adrian noticed it once, only once. He mentioned it to a specialist. The man smiled politely. "Just a nervous habit," he said, "nothing to worry about." Adrian believed him, because believing was easier than questioning. By the time Lucas turned 10, Adrian had stopped hoping. He still paid for tutors, still funded research, still donated to hospitals. But inside, something had died. Faith, maybe, or courage. The mansion hired staff to keep things running smoothly: gardeners, security, housekeepers. And one day, a new contract came through. A local public school needed a night janitor. Part-time, low pay, no benefits. The agency suggested a man named Samuel Reyes. Adrian barely glanced at the file. Janitor, 55 years old, former factory worker. He approved it without thinking. He didn't know that decision, so small, so meaningless to him, was the moment everything began to change. Samuel Reyes arrived on a quiet Monday evening. He wore worn shoes and carried a small lunch bag. His back was slightly bent, his hair streaked with gray. No one paid attention to him. No one except Lucas. From the top of the staircase, the boy watched the janitor quietly as he mopped the marble floors. Samuel hummed softly to himself, a hymn. Lucas couldn't hear it, but somehow he felt something, and for the first time in years, the silence inside that mansion began to crack. The doctors all looked the same to Adrian after a while. Different accents, different suits, different offices with glass walls and certificates framed in gold. But the words were always identical. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cole." Adrian sat in another consultation room, this one in Zurich. The doctor across from him tapped on a tablet, scrolling through Lucas's latest scans like he was checking weather reports. "We've reviewed everything," the man said calmly. "Your son's condition is congenital. The auditory nerve did not develop properly." Adrian leaned forward. "But the pain," he said. "He touches his ear, he winces. Deafness shouldn't hurt." The doctor smiled politely. Not kindly, politely. "Children develop habits," he replied, "especially children with disabilities." Disabilities. The word sliced through Adrian. "So that's it?" Adrian asked. "You're telling me there's absolutely nothing?" The doctor shrugged slightly. "Science has limits." Adrian stood up without shaking his hand. He'd heard enough. Back in New York, Adrian sat alone in his office late at night. The city glittered below him like a kingdom he ruled but no longer cared about. On his desk lay folders, hundreds of them. Medical reports, invoices, expert opinions. 7 years of hope stacked into paper. He picked one file at random and opened it. A scan. A note. Dense shadows near left ear canal. His eyes lingered on it. He frowned. He flipped through more pages, searching for explanation, follow-up notes, procedures. Nothing. He closed the file. Someone would have handled it, he told himself. These were the best doctors in the world. They wouldn't miss something important. Would they? Adrian pushed the thought away. Doubt was dangerous. Doubt meant admitting he might have failed his son, and Adrian Cole never failed. Lucas's school was small, private, carefully selected. The best tutors, the best programs, and now the cleanest floors. Samuel Reyes worked nights. He arrived after the students left, after the teachers went home. He cleaned classrooms, hallways, bathrooms, and every night before he began, Samuel paused in the empty school chapel. It was small, plain. Samuel removed his cap, bowed his head. "Thank you for another day," he whispered, "and for strength." Faith was all Samuel had left. 10 years ago, his wife died from cancer. 5 years ago, his son stopped speaking to him after Samuel couldn't afford college tuition. Life had taken almost everything, but it hadn't taken his faith. As he worked, Samuel hummed hymns softly, old ones his mother taught him. One night, as he cleaned the music room, he noticed someone sitting inside. Lucas. The boy sat alone at a piano, fingers resting on the keys but not pressing them. Samuel froze. Students weren't supposed to be there this late. He approached slowly, careful not to startle him. "Hey there," Samuel said gently. Lucas didn't respond. Then Samuel noticed the hearing device behind the boy's ear, the way Lucas didn't react to sound at all. Samuel's expression softened. He raised his hand and waved. Lucas turned. Their eyes met. Samuel smiled. Lucas stared at him, uncertain. Then, slowly, Lucas raised his hand and waved back. Something passed between them in that moment. Not words, understanding. Samuel pointed to the piano, raised his eyebrows in a silent question.
Lucas shook his head, then touched his ear and frowned. Pain. Samuel noticed it. Not like the doctors who glanced and dismissed. Samuel noticed because he'd lived with pain long enough to recognize it in others. Over the next weeks, their paths crossed often. Lucas stayed late at school waiting for his father's driver. Samuel cleaned. They exchanged small gestures, a nod, a smile, a shared silence. One night, Lucas suddenly pressed his palm hard against his left ear, his face twisting. Samuel stopped mopping. He approached, concern etched into his face. He mimed a question. "Are you okay?" Lucas shook his head. Tears welled up in his eyes. Samuel's chest tightened. He remembered his wife crying in pain, doctors saying, "It's normal, it's expected." It wasn't. Samuel pointed gently to Lucas's ear, then to his own. "May I?" Lucas hesitated, then, slowly, nodded. Samuel leaned closer, careful, respectful. The hallway light reflected inside Lucas's ear. Samuel's breath caught. Something dark, something that shouldn't be there. His heart began to pound. This wasn't deafness. This was obstruction. Samuel pulled back immediately, fear replacing curiosity. No, surely doctors would have seen this. Men with degrees, machines worth millions. Who was he to question them? A janitor, a nobody. Samuel stepped back, shaken. Lucas watched him, searching his face. Samuel forced a smile, gave a thumbs up, but inside his faith was screaming. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. He lay on his small apartment bed, staring at the ceiling. The image haunted him. That darkness, that pressure. "Lord," he whispered, "am I imagining things?" Silence. Then memory. His younger brother, deaf for years, diagnosed as permanent, until one rural clinic removed impacted material from his ear. One procedure, one moment. Sound returned. Samuel sat up. His heart raced. "What if?" he whispered. But fear quickly crushed the thought. What if he was wrong? What if he hurt the child? What if he lost his job? Or worse? He bowed his head. "God, I don't want to be foolish, but if you showed me something, don't let me ignore it." Across the city, Adrian Cole sat alone in his mansion staring at another medical report. Across town, Lucas lay awake, his ear throbbing, his world silent. And somewhere between faith and fear, a janitor wrestled with a truth that could change everything or destroy it.
Samuel Reyes had learned something about the world a long time ago. People don't really see you unless they need something from you. When he wore a factory uniform, supervisors saw him as replaceable. When he stood in hospital hallways with his dying wife, doctors saw him as a chart number. And now, as a school janitor, most people saw him as part of the building, like walls or floors, invisible. And most days, Samuel was fine with that. But ever since he'd looked into Lucas Cole's ear, invisibility felt like a burden. The image wouldn't leave him. That dark mass, that unnatural pressure. Samuel scrubbed the gym floor harder than usual that night, trying to drown his thoughts in work. The machine hummed, the smell of cleaner filled the air, but his mind kept going back to one moment years ago. His brother, Mateo. Mateo had been 8 when the doctors said the words Samuel never forgot. "He will never hear. Prepare yourselves." Their mother cried, their father went silent, and Samuel, young, broke, uneducated, believed them. For years, until one day an elderly nurse in a small border clinic noticed something no one else had bothered to check properly. A blockage. Simple, treatable. Mateo's first word after the procedure had been Samuel's name. That memory burned inside Samuel now. What if Lucas was living the same lie? The next evening, Samuel arrived early. He cleaned the lower floors first, then made his way toward the music wing. Lucas was there again, sitting at the piano. Samuel didn't approach immediately, he waited, watching from a distance. Lucas pressed a single key. Nothing. Not because the piano was broken, but because Lucas couldn't hear it. The boy sighed and leaned his forehead against the wood. Samuel felt something break inside him. He stepped forward slowly. Lucas noticed him and straightened, wiping his face quickly like he was embarrassed to be seen crying. Samuel smiled gently and tapped his own chest. "Samuel," he said, pointing to himself. Then he pointed to Lucas. The boy hesitated, then signed his name carefully. "Lucas." Samuel nodded. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Lucas suddenly winced, pressing his left ear again. This time Samuel didn't pretend not to see it. He pointed to the ear, then tilted his head, his expression soft with concern. Lucas's hands moved hesitantly in sign language. Pain. Always pain. Doctors say nothing wrong. Samuel closed his eyes. That was it. That was the confirmation he needed. Still, fear wrapped itself tightly around his chest. He wasn't a doctor, he wasn't family, he wasn't authorized, but he was a man of faith, and faith had never been about permission. Samuel stood and raised his index finger. "Wait." He walked to the janitor's closet and returned with a small flashlight. He held it up, then pointed to Lucas's ear again. Lucas stiffened. Fear crossed his face. Hospitals, doctors, needles? Samuel shook his head gently. No hurt. He placed a hand over his heart. Promise. Lucas studied his face for a long time. Something passed between them, something deeper than words. Trust. Slowly, Lucas nodded. Samuel leaned in carefully, angling the flashlight. His heart sank. It was even more visible now. Dark, impacted, blocking. "This is wrong," Samuel whispered. He pulled back immediately. He didn't touch anything, didn't attempt anything. Not yet. Lucas searched his face anxiously. Samuel took a piece of paper from his pocket and wrote slowly, carefully, in big letters, "There is something in your ear." Lucas read it. His eyes widened. Doctors missed it. Lucas's hands trembled as he signed. "Can you help?" Samuel swallowed. That question felt heavier than anything he had ever carried. Before he could answer, footsteps echoed down the hallway. A sharp voice cut through the air. "Lucas, what are you still doing here?" It was Mrs. Harding, the school administrator. Her eyes snapped from Lucas to Samuel. "What's going on here?" Samuel stepped back immediately. "Just cleaning, ma'am," he said respectfully. Mrs. Harding's gaze hardened. "Lucas, your father doesn't allow staff interaction beyond necessity." Lucas looked down. Mrs. Harding turned back to Samuel. "You've been warned before about loitering. Your job is to clean, not socialize." Samuel nodded. "Yes, ma'am." But as Lucas walked away, he looked back. Fear and hope battled in his eyes. That night, Samuel was called into the office. "You're crossing boundaries," Mrs. Harding said, folding her arms. "The Cole family expects discretion." Samuel lowered his gaze. "I understand. You will keep your distance from the boy, or you will be terminated." Samuel nodded again. "I understand." But inside, his heart rebelled. At home, Samuel fell to his knees beside his bed. He hadn't done that in years. "God," he whispered, tears spilling freely, "I'm afraid." He thought of Lucas's pain, of Mateo's miracle, of all the times people had trusted titles instead of truth. "If I'm wrong," he whispered, "stop me." Silence. Then something strange. Peace. Not relief, not certainty. Peace. The kind that doesn't answer your questions but tells you to move anyway. Samuel stood slowly. He opened his small medical kit, old, basic, left over from when he cared for his wife. Tweezers, sterile cloth, gloves. He stared at them for a long time. "I won't act unless I'm sure, unless the moment is clear." Across the city, Adrian Cole sat in a luxury car, staring out the window. His assistant spoke about investments, profits, projections. Adrian heard none of it. All he could think about was his son's quiet face, and a strange thought he couldn't explain. What if I've been looking in the wrong places? Faith was stirring, and soon it would demand action. Lucas Cole learned early that silence had rules. Silence meant watching instead of asking. Silence meant guessing instead of knowing. Silence meant learning people's faces the way others learned music. At 10 years old, Lucas could read emotions better than most adults. He knew when his father was angry, his jaw tightened. He knew when he was sad, his eyes went distant. And he knew when his father felt guilty because he avoided looking at him altogether. That hurt more than the silence. Adrian loved his son. Of that there was no doubt. But love wrapped in guilt can become something else entirely. Distance. Adrian didn't mean to avoid Lucas. It just happened slowly. First, fewer conversations, then fewer shared meals, then whole days where they passed each other like strangers in the same house. Lucas noticed everything. He noticed how his father's hand hesitated before touching his shoulder, how Adrian spoke loudly to him, then apologized, then stopped speaking at all, how every attempt at connection ended in frustration. Lucas had learned to stop trying. Pain lived with Lucas now. It wasn't always sharp. Sometimes it was dull, like pressure. Sometimes it burned. Sometimes it felt like something inside his ear was growing. Doctors said pain was imaginary. Teachers said he was anxious. His father said, "You're okay." So Lucas learned to hide it. He pressed his pillow against his ear at night. He chewed on his sleeve to keep from crying. He clenched his fists and counted breaths. One night, the pain got so bad he rocked back and forth on his bed, silently screaming. No one heard him, because no one could. At school, Lucas felt different, not just because he was deaf, but because he was alone. Other kids didn't know how to talk to him. Teachers were kind but busy. Specialists focused on programs, not people. Except one, the janitor. Samuel Reyes never rushed Lucas, never pitied him, never talked down to him. He just saw him. And that terrified Lucas, because being seen meant being vulnerable. The day after Mrs. Harding's warning, Lucas didn't stay late. He left as soon as classes ended. Samuel noticed. The halls felt emptier. That night, Samuel cleaned in silence. No humming, no prayer, just work. But his heart felt heavy. At home, Samuel opened his Bible randomly. His eyes landed on a verse he hadn't read in years. If anyone knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. Samuel closed the book. He knew. 2 days later, everything broke. Lucas collapsed during class. Not dramatically, just quietly. One moment he was sitting at his desk, the next he was on the floor, clutching his ear, face pale, breath shallow. Teachers rushed in. The nurse was called. Lucas was sent home. Adrian arrived at the school in a fury of panic. "What happened?" he demanded. "They think it's stress," the nurse said carefully. "Children with hearing impairments." "My son is in pain," Adrian snapped. "Has anyone checked his ear?" The nurse hesitated. "Well, his specialists have missed things before," Adrian said sharply. The nurse nodded, but nothing was done. Again. That night, Lucas lay curled on the couch, his head resting on his father's lap. Adrian stroked his hair gently. Lucas looked up at him, eyes full of something unreadable. He signed slowly. "Dad, does silence ever hurt you?" Adrian's throat closed. He shook his head. Lucas nodded, then turned away. Adrian sat frozen. Something inside him whispered, "You're missing something." The next evening, Samuel arrived at school to find chaos. An ambulance had come earlier that day. Teachers whispered in hallways. Lucas had been taken home sick. Samuel's heart sank. He rushed through his cleaning, barely able to focus. He finished early, too early. He stood alone in the hallway, mop in hand, heart racing. Then he felt it again, that peace, heavy, insistent. Samuel took off his gloves. He walked to the office. Mrs. Harding looked up, annoyed. "I told you to keep distance." Samuel nodded respectfully. "I understand," he said, "but I need to speak to Mr. Cole." Her eyes widened. "You absolutely do not." "Please," Samuel said quietly, "it's about his son." She laughed sharply. "You're a janitor." Samuel met her eyes. "I'm a father." Something in his voice made her pause. Still, she shook her head. "No." Samuel turned to leave. Then he stopped. "If anything happens to that boy and you knew someone tried to speak, you'll hear silence differently." He walked away. That night, Adrian Cole stood alone in his study again. Lucas slept upstairs, exhausted, pale. Adrian stared at the city lights. For the first time in years, he didn't feel powerful. He felt afraid. He knelt. The billionaire, who owned companies and countries, knelt beside his desk. "I don't know how to help my son. If you're real, I need you now." Miles away, Samuel Reyes knelt beside his bed. "Lord, give me courage, or stop me." And in Lucas's room, the boy pressed his hand to his ear, tears sliding silently into his pillow. The moment was coming. Faith had been tested. Fear had been acknowledged. Next would come action. No one breathed. The mansion that had held silence for 7 long years now held something heavier: anticipation. Samuel Reyes knelt on the floor, his hands steady, but his heart racing. Adrian stood frozen, one hand gripping the back of a chair, the other holding Lucas's small fingers so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Lucas sat perfectly still, too still for a 10-year-old. Fear flickered in his eyes, but he didn't pull away. He trusted them. That trust felt sacred. Samuel slipped on the gloves slowly, deliberately, not because he needed more time, but because he needed calm. "Lucas," Samuel said softly, even though the boy couldn't hear him. He made the signs carefully, gently. "I will be slow. I will stop if it hurts." Lucas nodded. Adrian swallowed hard. "If anything goes wrong," Adrian began. Samuel looked up at him. "I know," he said quietly. "I've already given my life to God once. Tonight, I give it again." Adrian had no answer for that. Samuel leaned in, positioning the flashlight so the beam cut cleanly into the ear canal. There it was, clearer than ever. A dark, hardened mass, impacted deep, pressing against flesh that looked angry and inflamed. "This has been here a long time," Samuel murmured. Adrian felt rage surge through him. All those doctors, all those machines, all those lies. Samuel adjusted the tweezers. His hands didn't shake, not because he wasn't afraid, but because fear no longer mattered. He whispered, barely audible, "Lord, guide my hands. Let me not harm this child." Then slowly he moved. The tweezers entered the ear canal with infinite care. Lucas flinched slightly. Adrian's heart nearly stopped. Samuel paused instantly. He pulled back. Lucas looked up at him, wide-eyed. Samuel signed. "Are you okay?" Lucas nodded. Pain, but different. Pressure shifting. Samuel continued. He hooked the edge gently. There was resistance, a lot of it. Adrian felt his knees weaken. "What if it's stuck?" he whispered. Samuel didn't answer. He applied slow, steady pressure, never forceful, never rushed. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then something gave. The mass shifted. Samuel's eyes widened. "Adrian," he said, voice tight, "hold him steady." Adrian dropped to his knees beside them, wrapping his arms around Lucas gently, protectively. Samuel pulled again, and then it came out. A thick, dark biological blockage, years of buildup, hardened, misshapen, horrifying. It landed in Samuel's gloved palm. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was absolute. Then Lucas gasped, not silently, audibly, a sharp inhale. Real, loud, startled. Samuel froze. Adrian's eyes flew open. Lucas's mouth opened again. He sucked air in like it was brand new. His eyes darted around the room. He pressed his hand to his ear, then pulled it away slowly. Confusion, shock, wonder. His gaze landed on the chandelier above them. His lips trembled. "Light," he whispered. Adrian's breath left his body in a sob. "You can hear," Adrian said, breaking his voice. "Lucas, you can hear." Lucas's face crumpled. He covered his ears, not in pain, but in overload. "So loud," he whispered. Adrian laughed and cried at the same time, pulling his son into his chest. "I'm here. I'm right here." Lucas pressed his ear against his father's chest. His eyes widened again. "Boom, boom," he said slowly. "Your heart." Adrian broke. The billionaire who had faced markets, losses, wars of business, collapsed onto the floor, sobbing like a child. Samuel stepped back, trembling now. His hands finally shook. He stared at what he held, the thing that had stolen 7 years of sound, 7 years of words, 7 years of life. "It's done," he whispered. The moment didn't last long. Reality rushed back in fast and brutal. Adrian looked up suddenly. "We need a hospital," he said urgently. Samuel nodded. "Yes," he said. "Now." Lucas clung to his father. "No doctors," he said fearfully. "They hurt." Adrian kissed his hair. "I won't let them hurt you," he promised, "ever again." Security was called. An ambulance arrived. As they rushed Lucas out, Adrian turned to Samuel. Blood, just a little, stained the gloves. Samuel started removing them. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to." Adrian grabbed his arm. "No," he said firmly. "You saved my son." Sirens cut through the night. At the hospital, doctors swarmed. Tests, scans, monitors. Lucas reacted to sound, every sound. Beeping machines, footsteps, voices. Overwhelmed, but alive. Adrian paced the hallway, his mind spinning. A young doctor approached, face pale. "Mr. Cole," she said carefully, "there's something you need to see." She led him into a small office. On the screen were Lucas's old records, scans from years ago. The doctor pointed. "There," she said. A dense obstruction was noted, multiple times. Adrian stared. "And removed?" The doctor swallowed. "No," she admitted. "It was left." "Why?" Adrian whispered. The doctor didn't answer. She didn't need to. Adrian felt something inside him shatter. They knew. They had always known, and they did nothing, because ongoing treatment was more profitable than a cure. Adrian sank into the chair. "My son lived in silence, because silence paid better." Down the hall, Samuel sat alone. Security stood nearby, not threatening, just watching. Samuel bowed his head. He wasn't praying for forgiveness. He was thanking God. The door opened. Footsteps approached. Samuel looked up. Adrian Cole stood before him. The billionaire's eyes were red. His face was undone. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then slowly, Adrian Cole knelt, right there in the hospital hallway, before a janitor. "I was wrong," Adrian said, his voice shaking. "About everything." Samuel stood instantly. "Please, sir." "No," Adrian said. "Please." He looked up at Samuel. "You trusted faith when I trusted money. You saw my son when I saw reports." Tears streamed down his face. "You didn't just give my son hearing. You gave him a life." Samuel's voice broke. "I just listened to God." Adrian nodded. "So did I," he said softly, "for the first time in years." The next morning, the hospital was buzzing with disbelief. Lucas Cole sat in his hospital bed, headphones off for the first time in his life. Every sound was new, overwhelming, magical. The beep of the heart monitor, the rustle of nurses' shoes, the faint hum of the air conditioning, it all felt alive. His eyes sparkled as he touched the bed rails, then tapped the metal water jug. Clink. He laughed, a real laugh, not the silent smiles he had learned to fake. Adrian sat beside him, holding his son's small hand, still trembling from last night's miracle. He couldn't stop staring at Lucas. Each word his son whispered now felt sacred, a treasure bought not with money, but with faith and courage. Samuel Reyes was standing in the corner, watching silently. He felt out of place among doctors in crisp white coats, monitors, and expensive equipment. He was just a janitor, nothing more. Yet he had done what the specialists couldn't. He had trusted God. He had acted. Adrian finally turned to him, eyes red but burning with gratitude. "Samuel, you saved him," he whispered. "Not the doctors, not the machines. You." Samuel shook his head. "I didn't save him. God did. I just listened." Adrian grasped Samuel's shoulders firmly. "No, you acted. You were willing when everyone else was blind. You are his miracle." The doctors were quiet, their faces pale. Some avoided eye contact entirely. One finally spoke, clearing her throat. "Mr. Cole, we did note the obstruction years ago. It should have been removed immediately, but it was deferred. Ongoing treatment, billing, protocols." Adrian's blood ran cold. "You left him deaf on purpose?" The room went silent. Samuel's eyes burned with controlled anger. Adrian's voice rose. "All those years of suffering because of profit? Because of money? And no one noticed, no one cared until a janitor did?" One doctor stammered. "It was an oversight." Adrian laughed bitterly. "Oversight? 7 years? 7 years of silence? You call that oversight?" Outside the hospital, news vans began to gather. A nurse had leaked a story about Lucas's miracle. Within hours, it went viral. Billionaire's son heals from deafness after janitor discovers missed ear blockage. Doctors under scrutiny. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended worldwide. #MiracleJanitor, faith over money, Lucas hears. Millions were captivated by the story of a child whose hearing had been stolen, then restored by someone with nothing but courage and belief. Back in the hospital room, Adrian held Lucas close. "Do you hear it?" he whispered. "All the sounds?" Lucas pressed his tiny hand to his ear. "Yes, everything. Birds, street, piano, your heart." Adrian choked. "My son, my miracle." Samuel stepped forward, hesitant. "I need to leave," he said. "I have bills to pay, a grandmother to care for." Adrian's eyes widened. "Samuel, no, you're staying with us until we figure this out. You're family now." Samuel shook his head. "I'm not part of this world. I can't be." Lucas suddenly reached out and held Samuel's hand. "You saved me," he whispered. Adrian's chest tightened. "See, you are family to him, Samuel. You always will be." Tears welled in Samuel's eyes. He hadn't expected gratitude, not like this, not love. The legal repercussions began immediately. The hospital faced investigations. Doctors and administrators were suspended pending review. Families whose children had been neglected came forward. Lawsuits were filed. Media outlets painted a grim picture, the industry that prioritized profit over life. Adrian used his influence to ensure justice, but he never wanted revenge. "We'll fix the system," he told Samuel, "so no child suffers like Lucas did again." Samuel shook his head. "I don't want money. I just want to help children. That's it." Adrian smiled. "Then we'll do it together." Over the next few weeks, Lucas adapted to sound. Every new noise was a revelation. Birds, car horns, laughter, music, even Samuel's footsteps on the floor. Everything was vibrant, alive. Adrian watched him constantly, fascinated. He had spent millions, traveled the world, consulted the best specialists, and yet the cure had come from someone nobody had noticed, someone invisible, someone faithful. Faith, courage, willingness, the things money could never buy. One morning, Lucas sat at the piano in the mansion's music room. Samuel watched him from the doorway. The boy pressed a key. C, then another, D, then a chord.
Sound, Lucas whispered to Samuel, eyes shining. It's real. Samuel smiled softly. Yes, it is, and it's yours. Adrian stepped in behind them, tears in his eyes. Music again, Lucas? Shall we hear it? Lucas nodded eagerly. Yes, Samuel, listen. The first notes of real music rang out in the Cole mansion after 7 long years. Adrian placed his hand on Samuel's shoulder. You brought sound to my son, to my life. I owe you everything. Samuel shook his head. No, I just trusted. Adrian's eyes sparkled. Faith is stronger than fear, Samuel. You proved it. Months later, the Cole family began a new chapter. Lucas thrived at school. Speech therapy and auditory training became joyful exploration rather than a painful struggle. His laughter echoed through the mansion. Adrian watched him constantly, fascinated. He had spent millions, traveled the world, consulted the best specialists, and yet the cure had come from someone nobody had noticed, someone invisible, someone faithful. Faith, courage, willingness, the things money could never buy. One morning, Lucas sat at the piano in the mansion's music room. Samuel watched him from the doorway. The boy pressed a key. C, then another, D, then a chord. Sound, Lucas whispered to Samuel, eyes shining. It's real. Samuel smiled softly. Yes, it is, and it's yours. Adrian stepped in behind them, tears in his eyes. Music again, Lucas? Shall we hear it? Lucas nodded eagerly. Yes, Samuel, listen. The first notes of real music rang out in the Cole mansion after 7 long years. Adrian placed his hand on Samuel's shoulder. You brought sound to my son, to my life. I owe you everything. Samuel shook his head. No, I just trusted. Adrian's eyes sparkled. Faith is stronger than fear, Samuel. You proved it. Months later, the Cole family began a new chapter. Lucas thrived at school. Speech therapy and auditory training became joyful exploration rather than a painful struggle. His laughter echoed through the mansion. Adrian watched him constantly, fascinated. He had spent millions, traveled the world, consulted the best specialists, and yet the cure had come from someone nobody had noticed, someone invisible, someone faithful. Faith, courage, willingness, the things money could never buy. One morning, Lucas sat at the piano in the mansion's music room. Samuel watched him from the doorway.
Months passed. The Cole mansion, once a fortress of silence, was alive with sound. Laughter bounced off the walls, the hum of daily life, footsteps, dishes, the soft whisper of conversation finally had meaning. Lucas explored it all like a newborn. Every noise fascinated him. The rustle of leaves in the garden, the wind tapping against the windows, the distant barking of a dog across the street. He discovered music, first timidly, then boldly, playing notes on the piano and listening as chords blended into songs. Samuel Reyes had become more than just a janitor. He was Lucas's guide, his friend, his constant presence. Adrian had insisted, "You belong here, Samuel. You helped bring life to my son." Samuel had been hesitant at first. He had never expected gratitude, recognition, or a place in a billionaire's world. But he stayed, because now he saw that miracles weren't measured in money or fame. They were measured in willing hands, in courage, in faith. Adrian Cole, meanwhile, became a different man. He still ran his empire, still made decisions worth billions, but he had learned a lesson that no wealth could teach. Some things, life, trust, love, faith, cannot be bought. They must be honored, protected, and nurtured. He met with the doctors and administrators who had failed his son. Publicly, privately, he demanded accountability. Hospitals were investigated, policies changed, children's welfare became non-negotiable. The world watched. Social media exploded. News outlets called it the miracle of faith and the janitor who heard God's whisper. Millions shared the story, inspired by the courage of a single woman, a single man, a single act of attention that changed a life. At the mansion, Lucas had his first real conversation with his father. "Dad, I hear everything," he said, pointing at the ticking grandfather clock. "Tick, tock, tick, tock." Adrian laughed, tears streaming. "Yes, son, that's time, and you can hear it, all of it." Lucas pressed his ear against Adrian's chest. "Boom, boom, your heart." Adrian hugged him tightly. "I've spent my whole life chasing power, but nothing is as powerful as this. Your voice, your hearing, your life." Victoria Reyes, Samuel's cousin, and the woman whose faith had inspired him, visited from out of town. She had seen Samuel struggle for years, fighting the system quietly while maintaining his dignity. She smiled at the scene in the mansion, Lucas laughing, Samuel teaching him music, Adrian kneeling beside them, awestruck by every new sound his son discovered. "Faith works in mysterious ways," she said softly. Samuel nodded. "It's not just faith, it's courage to act. That's what changes lives." Victoria placed her hand on his shoulder. "And you had it all along." Adrian decided to use his fortune for lasting good. He founded the Cole Foundation for Children with Hearing Impairments, hiring specialists, funding research, and creating a global network of programs to ensure no child would ever be ignored like Lucas had been. He invited Samuel to lead community programs, teaching children, guiding parents, and sharing the story that had gone viral worldwide. The boy who lived in silence now had a world of sound, and Samuel helped him navigate it. Lucas himself became an ambassador for children like him. His story inspired millions. He learned quickly, mastering reading, speaking, and music. But more importantly, he learned to appreciate every moment of sound. The laughter of friends, the chirping of birds, the first notes of a piano, the heartbeat of his father. The public continued to marvel at the story. A billionaire spends millions for his son. The real miracle comes from a janitor's faith. People were moved, people cried, people prayed, and millions were reminded that miracles are often hidden in the most ordinary hands. One evening, Lucas sat in his father's study, headphones on, listening to music he had never heard before. Samuel watched from the doorway, smiling softly. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Samuel said. Lucas nodded, eyes sparkling. "I never knew sound could feel like this." Adrian came in behind them. He knelt beside his son. "I'm sorry," he said, voice breaking, "for all the years I couldn't protect you, for all the mistakes. But from now on, I promise no more silence." Lucas smiled. "No more silence," he repeated. Then he added softly, "and no more fear." The mansion had transformed completely. Once a place of fear and guilt, now it echoed with joy, music, and laughter. Adrian often thought of the lessons he had learned. Money can buy specialists, money can buy machines, but money cannot buy attention, faith, or courage to act. Sometimes miracles don't come in expensive packages, they come from a willing heart. Samuel quietly prepared to leave for the day. He had work elsewhere, family to care for. Adrian stopped him. "Samuel," he said, "you will always be part of this family. Lucas would not be alive without you." Samuel shook his head. "I don't need thanks. Just seeing him laugh, hearing him speak, that's enough." Lucas ran to him and hugged him tightly. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." Samuel's eyes welled with tears. For the first time in his life, he felt seen, valued, and remembered. Weeks turned into months. Lucas thrived in school, music, and life. The story of his miracle continued to inspire millions online. People wrote letters, shared prayers, and began acting with courage in their own communities, just like Samuel had. Faith spread, not blindly, but actively, through action, care, and courage. And in the quiet moments, when the mansion seemed still, Adrian would sit with Lucas on his lap, listening to the small sounds of life. The hum of the clock, the rustle of pages, the tapping of piano keys, and sometimes his son's heartbeat. He had learned the most important lesson of all. Miracles do not come from money or power. They come from faith, courage, and willing hands, and sometimes they come from someone you would never expect.